We are very, very excited to have Vidita Kanniks with us today for this lecture series. Vidita is a vocalist. She's also an educator, and she's based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And I had the utmost pleasure to meet her. I think it was 2 years ago when I made a trip out to McGill, and we just clicked, and it was a wonderful connection. And I knew that just from the moment I met her, that she was incredibly special and somebody that we needed to have speak about her passions, integrating Indian classical music. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Vidita.
Yay. Oh, that was so nice. Thank you, Jesse. It's really like nice to see a bunch of familiar faces here, and I kind of love that it's like a very um I guess intimate setting we have because it'll feel more like a creative discussion than like a class. So please feel free. I mean, I know most of you. So please feel free to ask questions or jump in. I was planning on just giving sort of a basic overview of the various facets of Indian classical music and then sort of diving into the way that we can make it relevant to our practice, either as ensemble musicians or singers, etc., or just, sharpen oral skills in general. But like I said, this doesn't have to be very formal at all. Either you can put stuff in the chat or honestly even like unmute yourself and ask a question. Like I won't be offended. So yeah, we'll dive in. I wanted to add too. I think most of you already know this, but I usually do a little blurb like about myself. So I recently finished my master's degree at McGill University, where I studied early music and voice performance. And I was honestly drawn to early music because of the fact that it demands, um, I guess, a heightened level of musicianship that you don't necessarily are asked to display in other areas of classical voice. It's very improvisatory. There's a lot of sort of like listening involved in terms of ensemble. So in a way, it sort of led me back to my roots in Indian classical music. I was born and raised in a family of Indian musicians. It's also important to note that, like, not every Indian person would have, like, an understanding of Indian classical music because the genre itself is kind of similar to Western music in nature in that it sort of sits on this pedestal as like high art, something you spend a lifetime learning about and developing your virtuosity in. So I was really very fortunate to have grown up in this atmosphere that I actually sort of started to reject later in life, just because I didn't see it reflected in any of the areas that I was involved in growing up, whether it was like choir or you know I think I was in orchestra for a few years, and if anything, it just ended up being sort of this thing left on the back burner. So I think with a lot of time on my hands in the past year or so, it's been really a blessing to have some time to spend with my dad, who's a composer and teacher, and my mother, who plays the veena, actually, which is a music from the Carnatic tradition. And then sort of, looking at ways that I can share this with people, and the fact that people want to learn and listen is really incredible. So yeah, thank you for being here. That's my blurb, and I will dive in. So here's the oh my gosh. Okay. I always get flustered when I have to share my screen, even though I've done it like at least 1,000 times. All right. So I always like to begin with oh my goodness, talking a bit about um, India itself in terms of the diverse nature of identity and culture. So you can see kind of here that it's divided into what are called states, but in my opinion should honestly be countries. I like to think of India as more of like a little South Asian Europe, just because honestly, almost every one of these countries, sorry, states, has a language of its own, and if not an entirely unique language, a dialect of its own. Um, and you'll see a lot of variation in terms of like cuisine, um, like fashion, and just overall even behavior. So my family is actually from Tamil Nadu, which is down here in the south. And I guess the, sort of unifying thing, if anything, that unites a lot of the discord between different cultures in India is the fact that music has sort of persisted for so long. And that's not to say that music doesn't differ across India. It definitely does, and there's also quite a lot of folk music traditions that really vary from region to region. However, classical music is something that has been very much standardized over time and is now sort of largely divided into what are known as the Hindustani and the Carnatic systems. These are like the main codified systems that exist in this tradition. And it wasn't really until like the 15th or 16th ish centuries that these came to be known as what they are, due to a couple of prominent composers and scholars who sort of standardized this, and I'll get into that a bit later. But the classical tradition really built its way up from a history of both court music as well as sacred music. So pretty similar to the European tradition that we study. There was a lot of musical intonation involved in chant reading of the Vedas in particular and the Upanishads, which are the kind of the main two holy scriptures in Hindu philosophy. And these eventually sort of evolved into being known as like different modes or ragas, which I'll talk about later. And there was also a tradition of court music, which kind of makes me think of like, I don't know, like Viennese court music or like even the air de cour of like the 16th century, where you would have like court musicians who are appointed to be the composers for that particular emperor or king. And this sort of became a thing during the Mughal Empire, which was sort of the migration of the Middle Eastern empire into this particular region in South India, or sorry, South Asia. And there are many prominent court composers who, are still very, very much like they're like household names, you could say, like Mozart and Beethoven, who are known as composers today in the Indian tradition. And in terms of Hindustani and Carnatic music, which we now use, there's still a lot of sort of variation that happens within these traditions, but Hindustani is generally used to describe northern Indian music, and Carnatic music is southern Indian. Now, again, very, very vague, but I'll stop there for now for the sake of time, and I think some of these things will become more clear as I talk more. So, some of the foundational elements of Indian music, no matter if it's Hindustani or Carnatic, are still very, very central and don't really change, right? So these are also things that are central to all forms of music. So we have tala, which is just a generic word for beat or rhythm. Shruti is the word for a tonal center, which we acknowledge in Western music, but it's a lot more important in Indian music. And Shruti is actually just the Sanskrit word for sound or something that sounds. You might know an Indian person named Shruti. It's a very common girl's name. And there's actually a instrument known as the tanpura, which is pictured here on the side, which is devoted. I'm so sorry about this like jumping thing. I don't know if you can like see that. I'm gonna like make it go away. Sorry. So the tanpura literally exists to set and maintain the tonal center in a given performance. Um, and this actually transcends classical music, and you'll hear it in like pop music, you'll hear it in Bollywood music. It's like a very, very sort of quintessential sound when it comes to Indian classical music. And what it basically consists of is four strings that are tuned to your tonic and dominant notes in whatever key you choose to perform. So nowadays, not everybody has a tanpura or has the patience to like tune it. So there are a lot of like electronic tanpuras that are very like normal in a music household. I use this particular version of one when I teach. So it literally is like this box that you plug into a wall, and when you turn it on, it creates. I mean, it sounds kind of bad. It's not going to sound like the real thing, but you essentially hear it droning the tonic and dominant, and you can change the key, and it's tuned in semitones, just the 12 semitones that we use. So the Shruti is kind of one of these things that, like I said, we do acknowledge a tonal center in Western music, but in Indian music, it's a lot more integral just because the tonal center is really never allowed to change. That's one of the biggest differences. And I think that's why um, Indian singers who spend years and years and years learning with this thing on in the background develop a very strong sort of sensitivity to where the tonic is, and thusly all of the other pitches. So your sense of pitch relation to the tonic, no matter what key you're in, like I said, it's movable, becomes sensitive to a point where you can sort of freely improvise within that framework, right? And you would improvise either neutrally or on what is known as sargam. And sargam is something, if some of you have seen my videos, I sing a lot in sargam, right? Which is really just solfege. And this is another one of those things that we do use in Western music, but it's kind of taken to a whole other level in Indian music, because sargam is the musical language that allows you to become very solid in those intervallic relationships. There's like actually a whole term called swaranyanam, which means like knowledge of swaras basically. But like people ask like, oh, do you have swaranyanam? Like, this person has that? Like, wow, they're really great. Like I've heard my grandmother like be like, oh, well, this student is good because her swaranyanam is really good. And it's not perfect pitch, right? Because it's we don't tune to one system. It's rather always knowing, based on what your saw is, or sorry, when I say saw, I mean your tonic. Based on what the tonic is, or do, you pretty much always know by listening what solfege syllable any other note would be. And you don't have to think about it. It's like this process where you hear it and it's like they're like synonymous with each other. It's not something that you have to like hear a bunch of times and like hum in your head. Like after a while these two things become like um it's like an instantaneous response, and it gives you like an incredible command over your listening skills. So that honestly to me is one of the most amazing things. And sargam is also used not only in a pedagogical sense but also in performance. It's a way to show off your virtuosity. If you are in a concert setting and you can sing passages in sargam really really fast, like you're a pro. If you can transcribe something into swaras, it can be really impressive to show in a concert setting. And of course, like I said, improvisation is a huge component of this, right? So a lot of times you'll hear performers do an entire section where they just freely improvise on sargam. And I think it like takes the level of musical self-expression, and that to purely musical self-expression, to sort of another level. Ragas are probably one of the most abstract areas of Indian music, and I think this gets kind of misconstrued a lot in the Western world because you think of like raga, and I've heard a lot of people say like, "Oh, this person performs raga," or like she sings raga. Um, so that's actually like an incorrect way of phrasing it. Raga is not something that you perform. It's not a genre. Rather, it's simply a scale or a mode. So if you were to insert that into your language, you could say, okay, this piece is composed in this raga, or like this person is performing this piece in this raga. It would be like saying this song is in a major key or minor, right? Or in the Dorian mode, or like whatever. But the reason why I think ragas become sort of this esoteric concept is because ragas are a lot more oftentimes than a scalar mode. They can extend to having extra musical associations, such as affiliations with time of day, or certain moods, certain seasons. There can also be ragas that are meant to be healing. There are many ragas that are associated with certain deities of the Hindu tradition, or even certain like temples, like ancient archaeological structures, where a certain composer may have uh, created or invented a raga, and it might be attributed to them. So, to give an example of that, one of the most known medieval court composers in the Hindustani tradition is Tansen, and the lore goes that Tansen was actually challenged to sing a particular raga that would actually kill him because it creates heat. And it creates heat, around you and in the body. So like, it's funny. I grew up reading these like comic books about like Indian stories and famous Indian people. It's like this whole comic series that I think my dad would buy us like by the dozen. And one of them was about Tansen, and it's crazy. Like the way they picturized it like scared me so much as a kid, because they were like, he was the only person who was talented, and he's the only one who can even sing this raga in the way that it's meant to be done. But that would lead to his own demise because it killed him in the end. And then it showed him singing it, and he's like sweating, and there's like lamps lighting up in flames, and then he like dies. It was kind of it was a little scary. But that's what they say, right? That music really does have the power to influence the elements. And that also brings me to this idea of repertoire and the nature of the composer's role. So this is something that is another kind of difference, I would say, between Western and Indian music, is the fact that composers are more like songwriters. So the composers that have sort of gone down in history have all been attributed to vocal pieces, like songs with text. And vocal music really is at the center of this performance practice. And because of that, I actually compare it a lot of times to like I said, early music, or even jazz or pop. Sometimes it's kind of like singing in a band, right? Where you have your lead singer and they are like the main person. And then you have everyone else as sort of like the entourage to capture what they are trying to express. So, we don't really have this concept of polyphony or ensemble music where everyone holds equal weight. Rather, it's, a composer, or what we would say vagayakara, or more like a songwriter who is responsible for the melody, as well as, what raga it might be in, as well as text a lot of the time. So, going on from here, I wanted to play a brief clip demonstrating the significance of the tanpura and the shruti, which I talked about earlier. So this singer, her name is Kaushiki Chakrabarti. She is sort of at the top of her game right now in Hindustani music. She's a really beautiful singer. And I'll probably stop it in the middle just in case we don't have time. But she does go into detail later about like temperament and stuff, which is kind of interesting if anyone wants to watch this later.
Form, and I also play the tanpura. The Tanpura,
Sorry. Okay. She basically just says everything that I already just said. But like I said, if you're interested in the temperamental intricacies of this instrument, watch this later. There are so many things I could talk about just based on this little clip, like vocal style, vocal culture, ornamentation, things like that. But because I am sticking to sort of a more narrow topic today, I'm going to go on. But hopefully we can talk a bit later too if any questions about that arise, because I know many of you are singers. But in general, what she's doing here is an alap, which is a free improvisation on a given raga. So here she is singing the raga Jaunpuri. Jaunpuri is based on a natural minor scale. So I'm not sure if you could kind of hear that, but her sa was set to, I don't know what it is because I don't have perfect pitch. Wait. Okay, it was B flat. So she would essentially set her shruti, like tune it to wherever is a comfortable range for her. And an alap is sort of a way to introduce a raga before you sing, a song. And it's usually done on a neutral syllable. And she's really sort of leaning into like the dissonances created between her and the tanpura, which is sort of the purpose, I would say, of a raga. There's a lot of expressive quality to this improvised way of singing. And again, she's not singing in sargam, she's not singing in swaras, which are, by the way, they mean the same thing. You can use those terms interchangeably, just means solfege. However, she has to be like super aware still of what those swaras are, right? To even be able to create a melody in this way. So just something to sort of think about. Okay, so this is like a little clipping from a book that is actually taken from the Carnatic pedagogy. So Carnatic music actually has like a standardized book that was written by a saint songwriter composer called Purandaradasa. And it's funny because it's evolved over time and it's like been edited and there are all these new editions of it. And it's cute, right? Because you have like this book that lays out the European equivalents to all of the solfege, and it highlights that Indian music actually does function around 12 semitones. So this is also another like misconception I think that a lot of people have about Indian music, because a lot of people have asked me like, oh, so that means you sing in semi or microtones, right? Because I think to a Western ear it sounds microtonal. What you just heard Kaushiki sing sounded very microtonal, which is correct, but also not really. So essentially everything you might be hearing that is microtonal is what is called gamaka. So I've actually highlighted this word on my next slide. Oh, just kidding. We'll come back to that. Okay, so gamaka is the word for ornamentation. And ornamentation is essentially what makes Indian music sound Indian. So like when I was learning from my grandmother when I was a kid, she would tell me like, don't sing morte. And morte is the Tamil word for bald. So she used to literally tell me not to sing bald. And like, it's funny because that's all she said, but I think I knew what she meant by that. It was basically like, don't sing the melody really plain as how it is, but rather copy the gestures that I'm showing here. And because ornamentation is so wedded to the style of the singing, it's not something that you're responsible for entirely on your own, right? It's something that you pick up entirely orally from like day one. So a lot of music is taught with a teacher singing a phrase and a student repeating it back. So if a teacher adds a gamaka and the student doesn't do it, they'll sing it again and be like, hey, you didn't do this slide here. And then the student would be responsible for doing that back until it becomes a part of their musical vocabulary. And then again, the goal is to be able to freely improvise and have total command over both your stylistic and oral perception of music. So here I just wanted to talk through a few little differences between Hindustani and Carnatic music. I won't take too long on this. Ragas I'll talk about it on the next slide. Languages and text vary. Again, because India is so vast and there are many different languages represented, a lot of times languages can actually just reflect the region where the music was written. However, in classical music, a lot of times what we have is music in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is not necessarily spoken anymore, but many of the languages are derived from, many of the spoken languages are derived from Sanskrit, similarly to Romance languages and Latin. So in Carnatic music especially, there's a lot of music, sacred music actually, written in Sanskrit, but it's not necessarily sacred texts taken from an original source. A lot of times these Vagayakaras or songwriters actually write their own text in Sanskrit, sort of creating like a poetic display of a particular deity, or like I said, could be about a temple. So it's really very interesting. I've never come across a genre of music like this before. And then, of course, a lot of times in Hindustani music, music is or the text is in Hindi. In terms of instrumentation, there are a few differences. I'm sure everyone's heard of the tabla, which you see here on the left. And the sort of Carnatic percussion equivalent of that is an instrument called the mridangam, slightly different. It's a two-headed drum. Here in this photo, you see that there is, we've got our tanpura lady. And literally in any concert, you'll always have like a specific person whose job is to sit and play the tanpura and like tune it and like make sure that it's keeping everybody together. And even the drums are actually tuned to match the chosen shruti. So really everything, the shruti is at this focus of everything. I already, talked a bit about the role of improvisation, and I wanted to introduce the function of swaras through this little clip here. So this is actually the same singer. She's just really young here. She was sort of known as like this prodigy back in her heyday. And here what she's doing is working with her father on what are called palta exercises. You can also just call them like swara exercises. So this is another really sort of like integral part of music learning when you're just starting out. And she's at a very high level. So like, don't try this at home. But she is essentially singing patterns of swaras, sort of in like sequences or like intervallic sequences, which you'll be able to hear, and thusly, working on developing that fluency in pitch relations with sargam or swaranyanam, which is that word that I said before. So anyway, enjoy this clip. It's one of my favorites. Sorry, I'm still muted. Keep forgetting to unmute myself. So that gives you kind of an idea. Like I said, very advanced level, but this is like, the do re mi's of learning music, right? So when you have a voice lesson, you're not going to start with necessarily voice culture, but rather ear training. Like that's like the main thing, which is really, really fascinating to me. And I try to integrate that into even teaching Western voice lessons because I feel like it's a lot sort of more like productive, I think, as a young musician, and it's been extremely valuable for me. And like I said, you don't hear like what microtonal singing here, right? This isn't what you would think is Indian music. She's literally just singing patterns in a major scale. But this is like where the work begins, and eventually, like I said, when you get into when you attain that fluency and command over literally everything, you sort of reach that level where you can sing in the way that people perceive as microtonal singing. So I'll go on from here. And another quick note about ragas here. So this is just a major scale, right? This is, although it's a scale you recognize, this is a raga in Hindustani music. It's called Bilaval. And like this scale, every other scale that has a raga equivalent, and there are like many other modes. So, like I said, most basic root definition of a raga is like a scale. And ragas can, like I said, have other associations that have nothing to do with music, but they can also vary in terms of like ascending, descending differences, how many pitches are in a raga, right? You can have like pentatonic ragas, you can have like heptatonic ragas. They don't all have to have 7 tones. And there are actually arguably an infinite number of ragas just because there's an infinite number of musical gestures that you can create, right? So there are some ragas that have to be, have to showcase a certain pattern of swaras for it to be that raga, even if it might have the same notes as a different scale. So to kind of demonstrate that, the Dorian mode, for example, which we call Karahara Priya, goes like this. Right? So we have sa re ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa. And there's a raga in Carnatic music called Riti Gole. So it goes sa ga ri ga ma ni sa ni da ma pa ga ri sa. And you kind of have to have like that particular like gesture written into a melody for it to be that raga. So for example, there's like a really famous song that goes like, I think it's like a film song, and it goes Chinna karna naragiran or something like that. And it's like I used to hear it like growing up, and my dad would be like, "What raga is this?" And I'd be like, "Well," but anyway, that is kind of an example of how that manifests. And here I've sort of just outlined the Indian equivalents to all of the modes that we know in Western music. They all have Hindustani and Carnatic names because the traditions do differ. And they will differ stylistically too. So when I say stylistically, I mean in terms of gamaka, right? So there are Hindustani gamakas, there are Carnatic gamakas, and the style of rendition is what tells you, which sort of tradition you're listening to. So because there's this lady on YouTube who can explain this in a way more concise way than I can, I'm going to play you a little bit of her video. And like I said, go check this out if you're interested. And her entire channel is amazing, by the way. So, oh no. Oh, well, I guess we can't listen to that. I don't know why it's unavailable. Cursed. Okay. But maybe I'll try to play it again at the end. But I think a lot of what she dives into is sort of like the different types of ragas, right? So you can have a raga that sounds like this. This is called Mohanam Sari Ga Pa Da Sa Sa Da Pa Ga Ri Sa. and you could have a melody that goes like this and like this, da, 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 right? And so like when we would go, I think, to any kind of I guess like cultural festival, and there might be like any East Asian music that would clearly have a tonal center in this area and sound like the scale. My dad would be like, "What raga is this?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Malayalam." So it was kind of cool how like I had this sort of extra like layer of awareness for modes in this way, and it really helped me sort of like systemized music in my mind growing up, and I still call back on this today. There are a lot of like pop songs that are, you know, like modal, um, and I think, you know, ragas especially, like I said, are put on this like pedestal of being this crazy thing. Like, oh, to render a raga is like I'll never understand it, or like it's like this crazy like scary thing. But like I said, it can be as simple as just a scale. So I would encourage everyone to sort of like explore that, or you know, if you're doing warm-ups or like exercises in a major or minor scale, do it in a different raga, you know, like spice things up. The few that she kind of demonstrates here, some of the at least septatonic ones she's demonstrated here are Maya Malavagola, which is actually the thumbnail here, which goes like sa re ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa ma ga re sa, which has like augmented seconds that we don't sing a lot. You know, there's this raga which is sa re ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa ma ga re sa, which is called Charukesi. And this is sort of like a half major, half minor. We hear it a lot in pop music. Never talk about it in music theory. Don't know why. So I just like to, you know, to expand our oral boundaries with ragas. Okay, please change slide. Okay, I'm positive I already talked about all of this, so I'm gonna keep going. Oh, yeah, this point here, the fact that it's not notated, I'm happy to talk about that later. There are like forms of notation that exist for the sake of like documentation. There are even like books that sometimes have like little symbols that are like, this ornament is supposed to sound like this, or like yada yada. But the funny thing is, like, because it's an oral tradition that's been passed down for so many centuries, and like it's sort of been alive and thriving in a way, we can rely on this sort of generational evolution of this music, as opposed to having to like look things up or refer to treatises and things like that, which is a huge difference, I think, between Western and Indian music. And it's something I admire a lot, right? I think it speaks a lot to the nature of music in society. I think a lot more people have a general awareness and appreciation for classical music, and it's actually a lot more relevant to young people than Western classical music is to young people here, which something something I've always noticed is probably one of the reasons why, you know, I'm as involved with it as I am. So I have a few clips here. I think I'll maybe just play one of these. So this is actually from like an Amazon Prime like drama series. Go watch it if you're interested. It's the story itself is like quite bad. It's about this guy growing up in India, and he like meets this pop singer. She's Indian too. She's an Indian pop singer, and they like cannot relate, right? Because he grew up studying Hindustani music from his grandfather, and she's like Hannah Montana or something, and they just keep like butting heads because they don't understand each other's music, and then it's like this Romeo and Juliet thing where they're like, "Wow, I understand your world and you understand mine. Like, let's make something together." It's a little cheesy, but the cinematography is absolutely stunning. It takes place, I believe, in like Jaipur, which is like one of the most beautiful cities. And a lot of really awesome music here, and it also is a testament to the fact that classical music is still like sort of mainstream content for Indian people. So in this scene, you have this teacher who is holding a group lesson, and you'll see these students sort of improv battling, you could say. So they're singing a piece called Jago Mohan Pyare, which is like a song in its essence. It's a simple song. It's in a raga called Bhairav, and it goes like this. I don't know what Shruti they're singing in, but let's say this is the tonal center. So it's sa re ga ma pa da ni sa, which is the one that I actually just sang a few seconds ago. And very famous tune, but they're all what they're doing is improvising on swaras, on this, like, based around this piece, based around this raga. So it's kind of cool to see how they like riff off each other. I'm going to skip forward a little bit.
प्यारे तुम जागो मोहन प्यारे तुम सावरी सूरत मोरे मन भाए सावरी सूरत मोरे मन भाए सुंदर श्याम हमारे तुम जागो मोहन प्यारे तुम जागो मोहन प्यारे प्रात समय उठी भानुदय भय प्रात समय उठी सनि सरे सा नि सरे सा नि सा धनि सा धनि सा धनि सा नि सा धनि ध सा नि रे नि सा धनि सा ध सा नि धनि ध प म ध प म ग प म ग म रे म ग रे ग रे सा नि रे सा प्रात समय उठी भानु प्रात समय उठी भानुदय भय ग्वाल बाल सब भूपति ठारे दर्शन के सब भूखे प्यासे उठिए नंद दुलारे तुम जागो मोहन प्यारे सरे ग म प रे ग म प ध नि म प ध नि सा नि सा रे ग रे सा धनि सा नि ध प म प ध प म ग रे सा नि सा जागो मोहन प्यारे सारे ग म प रे ग म प ध नि म प ध नि सा प ध नि सा रे ग रे सा नि सा धनि सा नि सा नि धनि ध प म ग प म ग रे सा नि रे सा जागो मोहन प्यारे
So the bit is like that he like screwed up something, and like the teacher's like, be gone. But anyway, it's funny because you can kind of see like here that they're all really really good, and they all have like this very solid swaranyanam. They're all like very comfortable within improvising on solfege, and they're all very very well versed in the raga. But they're at this like point where he's sort of like pitting them against each other based on musicianship, where some of them are improvising properly, but they're not able to fit their little like lick into the given like rhythmic time frame that they're allotted. So like you have to like start your thing and then you have to finish on beat one, and some of them like can't do that, right? So it's kind of cool how they've demonstrated that here. And like I said, if you watch the show, you might learn a few more things if you're interested. It's in like sort of a little musical cultural awakening. I do recommend it. So I do like to talk about Tara a bit, but I'm not gonna do this because I want to keep going. Actually, I'm gonna skip all of this. Sorry. Stop. While we're on the subject of sargam and how it can be used practically, I've included a few pages here from, like I mentioned earlier, that book that is like a standard resource for Carnatic music teaching. And I actually I have my copy here, super tacky looking. Definitely needs a glow up. But, this is like a very tried and true teaching method, and I thought it would be fun to try singing through some stuff today. So essentially, it's a book of like exercises. And they're kind of similar to the exercises that you heard the little girl singing a few slides ago, but much more simple. And this is what I used to teach many of my students. This is what I grew up learning. And the cool thing is you can kind of sing these exercises in any 7-tone scale. So, you can sing them in a major scale. So the first one would sound like, sorry, my shruti on here. Sari, 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 gama, pa, da, ni, sa. Or you could sing it in like minor, sani, 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 da, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa, right? And then they get progressively more difficult. But maybe we can just sing through, number 2 and 3 now. Does that sound fun? I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so I obviously won't be able to hear you all, but let's just do it on a major scale. So here's the starting note. So how about like this tempo? Sari, sari, 1, 2, ready, go. Sari, 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 gama, pa, da, ni, sa, ni, da, pa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa. Yeah, nice. Cool. I'm sure that was very easy for all of you. So let's do number 3, and then maybe we can I don't know, I can't see the chat box, but just to mix things up, let's do it in a different raga that you might not have heard of. Okay, so we're gonna do this in Charukesi, which sounds like this. Sa, re, ga, ma, pa. So it's like a major scale up till pa, but then we have da, ni, sa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa. So it's like half major. So let's just sing this. Let's just sing this raga, but number 1. Okay, so we're just going up and down, ascending, descending. Ready, go. Sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa. All right, and then now we're going to do the exercise. So again, this tempo, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, ready, and sa, re, ga, sa, re, ga, sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa, ni, da, sa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa. Nice. How did we all do? I'm sure it was excellent. You're all great musicians. So the kind of cool thing is, right now we just sang this very semi-tonally, very morte or bald, as my grandmother would say. But what would Indianize this sound, right, is singing it like sa, re, ga, sa, re, ga, sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa, ni, da, pa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa, right? Adding all these little gestures, little ornaments, gamakas, which is a very, very intuitive thing that doesn't happen overnight, right? So that's one point that I always like to make really, really clear when discussing Indian music is what you might recognize as Indian music is actually something that takes years and years to cultivate and begins with a very similar, learning process to classical music as we know it. So, this book does eventually get harder, and we have stuff like this. So, to do a quick demo, in this same raga, it would sound like Sari sa gari gari ma sa ma gari sari ga ma ri ga pa ri pa ma gari ga ma pa ma ga ma pa da ni ma ni da pa ma pa da pa ni da sa ni da pa da ni sa. So you have a lot more like intervals, you have a lot more, you can do it, at different speeds, and you can implement this exercise in so many different ways. So I find this really, really valuable. And it's helped a lot of my students like even match pitch in different modes and such. So this is sort of like a tool that I like to share. And if anyone's interested, I do have like a PDF of some of the pages of the book, which I can pass along. And yes, I'm pretty sure I talked about all of this again. But one idea that I like to always hone in is this concept of music learning, at least in the Indian way, as like language learning. Something you have to learn very experientially. It takes time. You have to really get a lot of like context, not just cultural context, but just musical context, right? To be able to like understand what's going on. So this always becomes like a bit of a touchy subject when I come across pieces that have like borrowed Indian ideas or Indian concepts, because sometimes they really just scratch the surface of everything else that's really going on here. So I think it's really important to understand this at a root level, and when you do, it can be like really, really incredibly rewarding. And it's something that I rely on, to this day, even for things like sight reading. Sometimes you'll often see like swaras scribbled into like complicated Bach passages, because I'm like, okay, where is the sa? Like the tonal center keeps moving, but as long as I know where it is, like I'm good, right? So that's really what my biggest pride is, and what I feel very privileged to be able to share. And I hope this was informative for you all, and I'm happy to take questions. I know we don't have a ton of time left because I talk a lot, but I'm pretty sure this was my last slide. Yes. Okay, great. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Vidita. We actually, there was a question in the chat. Ryan, I don't know if you would like to unmute yourself, or if you'd like me to read the question for you. I'm happy to do either.
Sure, there was that question, and then I also just really quickly had a question about the Palta video.
Oh yeah.
And how there was like a clicking sound that sounded like an instrument accompanying the.
Oh.
And so I was wondering if you could say what instrument that was, and also if you become technically proficient on that instrument at the same time that you were learning this.
So I actually like don't play that instrument. It's called a harmonium. And it's like a sort of a colonial gift to India. So I think it arrived like around 19th century and became a very, very stable part of Hindustani performance practice. And it's often used as sort of like a little extra voice, or like a little accompaniment, either during like practice or, you'll see it in a concert too. And the clicking sound is just coming from like the keys. So it's like, there's like a accordion thingy that like gives it the gas and creates a sound, and you just like play it like a keyboard. So that's where the clicking sound comes from. And I think a lot of times, yes, a keyboard instrument is like extremely helpful, right? Like as it is always, like I tell my students to use their keyboard and like sing. I tell them to like play and sing all of their exercises, all their sort of exercises, but it doesn't have to be a harmonium, right? Like it can be a piano or like an organ. But anyway, sargam, I think, to answer your question, I think it's similar in a way. Its function, I think, is a lot more universal, but there are definitely some people who just are more naturally like apt to like understanding pitch relation at that level. You know what I mean? Like whether you have a vocabulary for it or not, I think like, and I think there are just like, I mean, even I have like very early memories, I think, of like knowing how to play like three blind mice on the keyboard. Like a lot of kids can do this, right? They'll be like, their parents are like, oh, they figured this out by ear. Like they're really good musicians. And I'm sure you guys figured out stuff by ear when you were a kid and you play it. So I think it like innately lives within a lot of us, but we just don't have a way to like a language to express that. And I think that's what the solfege provides us. And it has a lot more potential than just doing like do re mi in third grade. And that's why I also like might get into a fight with somebody about like fixed do, because I think like maybe fixed do helps. I don't really know. It didn't help me. I did my undergrad in a fixed do school and it was like torture. Because my brain was already like very wired in like this movable way, right? But I think just like always being able to like know where sa is or know where your tonic is and going from there. What even if you have key changes in a piece or like even if that's like a thing, that happens, it's still something that like anybody can, I think, develop an awareness for. Does that make sense? Like I think it can be learned. Especially when you have a Shruti in the background literally playing it for you constantly. Yeah, Will.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and sharing this. This was awesome. I have a lot of questions, but I'll go with one about vocal technique, because that was something that didn't come up in the.
I know who my audience is. Like, this is definitely going to come up.
Right. Okay. So, like, if you were to write a slide about vocal technique in Indian classical music, what would be the first couple of things you'd say about it, especially to this audience of, I assume, a lot of classically trained singers?
Yeah. I think with Indian music, it's interesting because like there's a lot of emphasis placed on musicianship, right? Like your value as a singer is a lot of times placed on like, can you sing in tune? Do you have this like swara knowledge? Is that like flowing well? Are you catching on? It's a lot less surrounding like vocal beauty or range, which I think is a big fundamental difference. We don't really have like a system of standard like lyrical singing, like this is how you do it. Rather, like each voice is what it is, but if they're very musically proficient, then they could be like lauded for that. So you'll actually hear a lot of times like uglier voices singing, but they're incredible. And what they can sort of demonstrate in terms of ornamentation and musical virtuosity surpasses the nature of the voice, or like voice culture, or like the importance placed on that. A lot of times singers are, at least in Carnatic music, singers sing in a very limited range actually. It's set often pretty low, and you probably heard that too. And I personally, being from a Western sort of culture of music, resisted that a lot. And that's actually one area that I don't love, because I think the human voice is capable of a lot more. And I think there are ways that you can sing very healthily that a lot of times are not brought to attention in Indian music. So that's another area where I try to kind of harness the best of both practices. And I have never tried to force my voice into doing something it doesn't want to do. And I like sing in the range that's comfortable for me, and like it's not very traditional. I will say though that in Bollywood music, which is very influenced by classical music, it's a bit different, and there are a lot of like soprano like voices in that area, and tonal quality is given more importance, I think, probably because they have to be like recorded, right? So it's interesting how that came to be.
Well, thank you so much, Vidita. Unfortunately, we are just out of time here. So I just want to say thank you so much for spending your time to be with us and to give this huge insight to the Indian classical world, both in a musical sense and in a cultural sense, and how we as singers and conductors and musicians can start to look at this music more and have an appreciation for it, and also start to integrate it somehow in our lives. So thank you so much for presenting on this topic. And if anybody has any more questions or would like to contact Vidita, you can send me an email and I can jet it towards Vidita. So thank you all so much, and thank you for being here and supporting Vidita too. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.